Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the New Zealand Franchising Podcast. I'm Callum Floyd. In the last episode, we looked at why businesses franchise. We explored the different circumstances that can lead a business towards franchising. But today, I want to look at the other side of that relationship. Why do people buy franchises? And just as we found when looking at why businesses franchise, there is no single answer. People approach franchise ownership from very different circumstances, with very different aspirations, levels of experience, financial capacity, and expectations. If we imagine it like a spectrum, at one end may be an employee or manager considering business ownership for the first time. There are also migrants establishing themselves in a new country, couples, families and friends looking to build a business together, experienced business owners seeking diversification, and established franchisees looking to expand into multiple units. And at the other very extreme end, a franchisee may actually be a substantial corporate investor. Here in New Zealand, a very relevant example is Restaurant Brands, which operates KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and Carl's Jr., and has built a large multi-brand restaurant business. Internationally, another extreme example is Arcos Dorados, the world's largest independent McDonald's franchisee, with rights across much of Latin America and the Caribbean. I once held shares in Arcos Dorados myself, and examples like these completely change the mental picture many people have of what a franchisee actually is. So when we talk about people buying franchises, we are really talking about an extraordinarily broad spectrum of investors, ownership structures, and circumstances. And the franchises themselves are just as diverse. They span hospitality, retail, home and commercial services, trades, education, fitness, property, automotive, and many other sectors. Investment levels too can range from relatively modest amounts for some mobile or home-based businesses through to very substantial investments in premises, equipment, stock, and working capital. Total investment ranges can vary massively from less than $50,000 to well in excess of $1 million. And the actual role of the franchisee can differ enormously too. Some franchisees work directly in the business every day, or even fractionally in the evenings in the case of some industries like commercial cleaning. Others lead teams of employees, some own multiple units, others oversee managers, and in some franchise structures, the franchisee's role may be much more strategic and investment-oriented. So when we ask why people buy franchises, we first need to recognise just how broad that question really is. Different people have different objectives, and this is a subject I've studied over a long period. Alongside Franchise New Zealand Media, I've conducted research into prospective franchisees in New Zealand, most latterly in 2022 and again in 2024, as well as working with franchise systems and prospective franchisees over more than 30 years. One thing that comes through very clearly is that prospective franchisees do not all arrive with the same objective. For some, the primary attraction is financial. They want to increase their income, build wealth, or create an asset that has value beyond the income they earn while operating it. For others, the motivation may be a career change. They may have reached a point where they want greater control over their working life or want to build something of their own. Or to the current environment, they may have been made redundant. For others again, lifestyle, flexibility, family involvement, personal challenge, or creating something that might ultimately be passed on to the next generation can be important. And frequently, several of these motivations operate together. Why people buy franchises? Our 2022 and 2024 prospective franchisee research provides useful evidence here. In both studies, greater income and wealth building potential was the most commonly identified motivation, but it was clearly not the only one. Prospective franchisees also identified better life balance, career change, flexibility, greater control, security and stability, personal challenge, and building something for the family. And there is another financial motivation that I think is sometimes overlooked. For some people, buying a franchise is not primarily about becoming wealthy. It may be simply one of the best available ways of creating a good and sustainable income for themselves and their family, where there may not be an employment opportunity available that probably matches their previous experience, qualifications, aspirations, desired income, or their current circumstances. And for some smaller service franchises, that can be particularly relevant. In certain systems, a new franchisee may acquire an established customer base, a defined level of turnover or work, or there may even be some form of minimum income or income support during an initial period. And those arrangements vary enormously and obviously need to be investigated carefully. But for some buyers, that degree of income visibility can materially change the attraction of the franchise opportunity, and also helps to explain why financial certainty, earnings potential, and return on investment feature so strongly in prospective franchisee concerns. And this is important for franchisors to understand as well. When recruiting a franchisee, you're not simply evaluating whether someone has enough money to buy the franchise. You also need to understand why they want it. Because if the expectations and motivations are fundamentally inconsistent with the reality of the business, that can create problems later. Someone seeking substantial lifestyle flexibility may not be well matched with a business that requires intense owner involvement 7 days a week. And someone primarily seeking passive investment may not suit a franchise model designed around an energetic owner-operator. So motivation matters, but there is another question. Why choose a franchise rather than employment or starting independently? There are broadly 3 pathways we can think about. A person might remain in employment, they might start an independent business, or they might buy a franchise, and each involves a combination of ownership, independence, support, risk, and potential return. Employment can offer relative certainty, and there may be regular income, organisational support, and considerably less personal capital at risk. But the employee does not own the business and generally has limited participation in the capital value they help create. At the other extreme, starting an independent business provides enormous freedom. You can develop your own brand, systems, products, pricing, and strategy. But you also have to develop all of those things. You need to establish the brand, prove customer demand, develop operating systems, identify suppliers, develop marketing, build your technology base, and learn through your own mistakes. So franchising sits somewhere between those two. And I sometimes think of it as guided independence. You own your own business and carry genuine commercial responsibility, but you operate within an existing brand and business system. And of course, that support comes with obligations. A franchisee does not have the unrestricted freedom of an independent business owner. They agree to operate within the franchise system, comply with standards, pay agreed fees, and accept that some decisions are made for the benefit of the wider network rather than one individual business. And that balance between independence and systemization is one of the defining characteristics of franchising. So what is it about the franchise model that appeals? And this is another area where our research has produced a very consistent picture. When prospective franchisees were asked what most appealed to them about buying a franchise compared with starting an independent business, 3 factors stood out strongly: a proven business system, an established and recognized brand, and startup and ongoing support and training. And those results are quite revealing. People are not simply buying the right to put a familiar name above the door, they are buying access to a broader business platform. They may include operating systems, intellectual property, technology, supplier arrangements, marketing capability, training, business support, knowledge, and the accumulated experience of the franchisor and other franchisees. And importantly, they're buying evidence. A well-established franchise can demonstrate that the concept is operated in multiple markets and under multiple operators. But that does not remove business risk, and no franchise is risk-free. But compared with creating a completely independent business, a strong franchise can remove some of the uncertainty around what the business actually is and how it should operate. I want to spend a little bit more time on the brand point because I think its importance can sometimes be understated. An established brand is not simply about national advertising or customers recognizing a logo. For some franchisees, there is considerable value in becoming the local representative of an established brand. For the right person, being able to say, we are the local brand of business, can be a significant part of the attraction. It brings an existing identity, credibility, and market position that an independent operator might otherwise spend years trying to establish. There can also be a personal dimension to that. The franchisee may become personally associated with the brand within the local community, and they build customer relationships, employ local people, sponsor local organisations, and over time become the face of that brand in their market. And for some buyers, that is incredibly appealing. For others, however, the brand may be less important. A business-to-business service franchise, for example, may rely much more heavily on local selling, operating know-how, or lead generation. So once again, different buyers can be attracted to the same broad concept of franchising for quite different reasons. Brand, system, and support are not equally important to every buyer. That leads to another point. There is no universal hierarchy of franchise benefits. For one buyer, brand recognition might be the principal attraction. For another, it may be the operating system. And for another, training may be particularly important because they're entering an unfamiliar industry. An experienced business owner may need relatively little basic business training, but place considerable value on purchasing power, marketing capability, or the opportunity to own multiple units. Another person may be attracted primarily by the financial returns, another by lifestyle, or by the opportunity to operate in a particular town or territory. And that is why both franchisors and prospective franchisees need to understand what the particular franchise proposition actually offers and how well that aligns with what the prospective franchisee wants and is capable of delivering. There is another distinction prospective franchisees need to understand. Are they buying a new or greenfield franchise, or are they purchasing an established franchise business from another franchisee? And these can be quite different investments. With a greenfield operation, the franchisee is establishing the business from the beginning. There may be no existing customers, employees, or local trading history. And the franchisee may need to establish awareness, build sales, and fund the business through its initial ramp-up period. That means there can be a greater establishment risk. On the other hand, the franchisee starts with a clean slate and may be establishing the business in a new territory with considerable growth potential. An established resale is different. There is already a trading history. There may be customers, employees, premises, equipment, and established local goodwill. And that gives the buyer considerably more information to evaluate. But an established business will normally have a price attached to that history and goodwill, and the buyer also needs to understand what has happened under the previous owner. Why are they selling? Has the business been properly maintained? What investment may be required? And how dependent has the performance been on the outgoing franchisee? Our research has found prospective franchisees interested in both greenfield and resale opportunities, with many buyers open to either. So again, there isn't inherently a right or wrong option. They simply involve different risks and different forms of evidence. So far, we've talked largely about attraction, but prospective franchisees also have reservations, and those reservations are extremely important. In our recent research, the most commonly identified concerns related to the initial investment and ability to finance it, together with uncertainty around income and return on investment. That should not surprise us. Buying a franchise can involve a very substantial commitment of personal savings, debt, and sometimes family assets. And prospective franchisees want to understand what they may realistically earn and what return they can expect relative to the capital and effort involved. Other concerns include the strength of the market, the amount and quality of franchisor support, restrictions imposed by the franchise agreement, the buyer's own capability, and importantly, trust in the franchisor. And that last point should not be underestimated. A franchisee is entering into a long-term, interdependent relationship. They're committing capital and often a significant part of their working life to a system controlled in important respects by another organisation. So credibility, transparency, and trust matter enormously. And interestingly, when prospective franchisees in our 2024 research were asked what would give them greater confidence, many of the answers were effectively the mirror image of their concerns. They wanted better evidence of financial performance and the proven business model. They wanted a reputable and transparent franchisor. They wanted validation from existing franchisees. They wanted clarity about support, and they wanted to complete proper due diligence. And that tells franchisors something very important. A strong franchise opportunity is not just the one that sounds attractive, it is the one that can withstand careful investigation. We'll dedicate a future episode specifically to how to investigate and buy a franchise. But for now, I want to finish this part of the discussion with 5 initial considerations. The first is personal fit. We need to understand the actual role of the franchisee and what you'll be doing every day. Does that suit your strengths, interests, family circumstances, and your objectives? We also need to think about the pressures involved. Running any business can be stressful, and sometimes franchising can add additional relationship pressures with the franchisor and sometimes other franchisees. You need to be comfortable taking responsibility for your own business while also operating within a wider system. So personal fit is just not, can I do this job? It is also, am I suited to this form of business ownership? The second key area is around investment and economics. Here we need to understand the total investment required, not simply the initial franchise fee. We need to consider the working capital, debt servicing, owner income requirements, and the financial resources you may need while the business becomes established. We need to understand what you're actually buying. And if an opportunity includes an existing customer base, minimum turnover or guaranteed work or some form of income support, understand precisely how that arrangement operates, how long it lasts, and what conditions are attached to it. We also need to carefully investigate the potential cash flow, profitability, and return on investment. The third is around the strength of the business and the franchise system. What evidence is there that the business model works? How strong is the brand and competitive position? How effective are the operating systems, technology, marketing, training, and support? And how are existing franchisees actually performing? And in New Zealand, I would also look at whether the franchise system is a member of the Franchise Association of New Zealand, or FANZ, which in itself will be the subject of a future podcast. FANZ membership does not remove the need for due diligence, and it is not in itself guaranteed franchise performance. But membership does mean the franchisor has committed to operating within the association's standards and requirements. Fourth key area is around the franchisor and the relationship. Here we need to assess the people behind the system. Are they capable? Are they adequately resourced? Do they communicate clearly and transparently? Do they have a strong track record? Do existing franchisees trust them? And are you personally comfortable operating within the rules, responsibilities, and obligations of their franchise system? Remember, you're not simply buying a business, you're entering into a long-term commercial relationship. The fifth and final area we'll cover here relates to undertaking proper due diligence and obtaining independent professional advice. And this is an area where there should be no shortcuts. Talk with existing franchisees, review the disclosure information carefully, and understand the franchise agreement and the obligations it places on both parties. Investigate the financial assumptions, working capital requirements, and potential returns, and consider how these relate to the location or territory that you're considering. And at a minimum, obtain independent professional advice from an appropriately experienced and qualified lawyer and accountant before committing to the franchise. The lawyer should help you understand the franchise agreement, disclosure information, and legal obligations. And the accountant should help you assess the financial information, funding requirements, cash flow assumptions, and likely economics of the business. Depending on the opportunity, you may also need advice from a banker, franchise consultant, or other specialist. But legal and accounting advice should be regarded as fundamental parts of the due diligence process, not optional extras. And importantly, we need to talk to existing franchisees. Ask about their experience with the franchisor, ask about the support they receive, ask about the economics of the business, and ask whether the reality has matched their expectations. Do not allow excitement about the opportunity to replace investigation. So why do people buy franchises? Sometimes it's about income and wealth creation, as we've seen. Sometimes it's about independence, and sometimes it's about creating a viable source of income where the alternatives available through employment are not particularly attractive or available. And sometimes it is about a career change, achieving greater flexibility, or building something with a partner or family. For some people, the appeal is the opportunity to become the recognized local operator of an established brand. And for others, it may be the proven business model, operating systems, training or support, or the opportunity to grow into multiple units. And frequently, several of those things are important at the same time. And ultimately, I think the key question is not simply, is this a good franchise? It is this the right franchise for this person in these circumstances? And that is a much more useful question. In future episodes, we'll continue exploring some of these issues in more depth, including what makes a strong franchise system and how prospective franchisees should investigate and evaluate a franchise opportunity before committing. Thank you for joining me for episode 4 of the New Zealand Franchising Podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed today's discussion. And if you have, please consider following the podcast and sharing it with others who may have an interest in franchising. Until next time, I'm Callum Floyd. Thanks for listening.